What's up guys, Justin here with the SketchUp Free Essentials. So in today's video we're going to kick off our series on learning how to use the free version of SketchUp. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. Alright, so just a note, this is going to focus on the free online version of SketchUp. If you want to learn how to use SketchUp Pro, the desktop version, I will link to a tutorial I've done on that on my other channel, the SketchUp Essentials. But let's go ahead and let's jump into this. So when we first take a look at this, we're going to visit app.sketchup.com. And your page is going to look something like this. And so this is going to be our page where we're going to be able to create and manage our different models. So notice how right here I've got this little window. I can just click on Start Modeling. Now this window may not pop up if you have models saved in there. This is a completely blank version for me. So when you first start, it's going to look like this. But first off, let's take a look at our viewport and the 3D space that we're going to be working in. So you've got different bars on here that are going to give you access to different tools. So up at the top of the page, you've got options for things like naming your model. So if I click on this, I can set a location to save my model. These models are going to be saved on Trimble's servers. So in this case, I might create a folder right here. Then within this folder, I can name this. So I'm just going to call it 01 Getting Started. Now note that if you reload this app.sketchup.com, after this is saved, now this page is going to look like this, and you're going to be able to access your different models in here. And so note that when you do create a new model, you can also select from the drop down your units that you want to use. You can change this within SketchUp as well. But let's go back into this Getting Started model. So you've also got options at the top of the page for doing things like exporting your models to different formats, downloading your models, adding location, other things like that. On the left-hand side, you're going to have a toolbar that's going to give you access to different tools. And so you can click on these tools in order to activate them, and notice when you do that, your mouse icon is going to change into the icon associated with that tool. So notice how every tool that I activate over here is going to activate a tool on in your actual 3D workspace. And so two things about this. First off, you can click in here and you can add or access additional tools that aren't shown on this menu bar right here. So like for example, if I wanted to edit my model axes, I can click on that axes tool and notice how it's going to add it down below. Now that's not a permanent thing. So if I activate a different tool, right, like the zoom extents, and I just keep adding these right here, eventually it's going to swap out those tools with different tools in here. So I think you can only have 3 over here on the left-hand side of your page. But the other thing is most of the time you're going to want to activate those tools using keyboard shortcuts rather than clicking on the icons, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But just as an example, if I tap the L key, it's going to activate the line tool in here instead of me having to come over here and click on this option. But that is the toolbar on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you've got a number of different toolbars that will pop out if you click on them. And notice how when I do that, I'm able to access a bunch of different things. And so you can click on these icons in order to get these toolbars to pop out. You can click on them again. And so notice how they're going to be kind of a blue shade when they're open. You can mouse over these and click on the X button in order to close them back out, or you can just click on this arrow button in order to make them go away. But this is going to give us access to things like the entity info of the object you have selected. So you can use this to see different things about your objects, like the area of face, the materials that have been applied, other things like that. So there's a bunch of tools in here that we will get into, but for now, just know that you're able to use these in order to see different things about your model and change different things. So you've also got options to do things like toggling shadows on and off, other things like that in this right toolbar. Now down at the bottom, you've got a bar that's going to show you things about your active tool. So for example, right now I have the select tool active, and this is going to give me instructions on what to do for how to use this tool. So notice how it says right here to click or drag to select objects. Well, that just means I can click or I can click and drag in order to select objects. If I activate the line tool, it's going to tell me to click to set my first endpoint, my second endpoint. But let's go ahead and let's draw a little bit, and then we'll talk about navigating in the 3D space. So right now we are in this three-dimensional space. This is where most of our work is going to happen. Well, notice how if I come over here and I click on this line tool right here, that activates the tool for use in the 3D space. Now, notice how when you mouse over things, you are going to get various points and things that kind of pop up. That's the inferencing engine, which is SketchUp basically trying to help you figure out where you're going to be working in a 3D space. But very simply, to activate a tool, you're going to follow the instructions at the bottom of the page. In this case, with the line tool active, which you can do either by clicking on this or by tapping the L key on your keyboard, which I recommend, you're going to single click in order to set your first point. Now, if I move my mouse, notice how this is drawing a line between that first point and another point inside of your 3D space. Now, notice how this line turns different colors. That's SketchUp telling you, okay, if you were to try to draw straight up and down in the blue direction, you would click right here. Where if I'm not doing that, notice how this is just kind of like drawing this off in space. Those inferencing functions make drawing in the 3D space precisely much easier. But in this situation, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to click again in order to draw a line. And notice when I do that, this tool stays active and I can click and I can draw as many edges off of this line as I want. Now, generally speaking, once you draw your line, you're going to want to deactivate this tool, which you can use either by tapping the escape key, or a lot of the time what I do with a tool active is I just tap the space key. And what the space key does is it just switches you to the select tool and it deactivates whatever tool you have active. Now, let's say we wanted to draw a line that's a certain length. So I'm going to tap the L key, move my mouse over here, and I'm going to click. Notice how in the lower right hand corner in this bar, there's a function that's showing you how long the line that you're working with currently is. And so what you can do is you can either move your mouse until you get a length that you want, or with this tool active, you can type in a value. So if I typed in a value of 9 feet, and hit the enter key, that's going to draw a line that's 9 feet long. And we could measure this using the tape measure tool right here in order to verify that it's 9 feet long. Now, one thing I didn't talk about originally is when you activate this tool, or really any tools in SketchUp, I highly recommend that you don't click and drag. So if I tap the L key again, move my mouse over here, and I click and drag, notice what that's going to do is as soon as I let up on this line, it's going to draw the line, right? Well, the problem with that is it doesn't really let me type in the value of the line that I want to put in here. Now, once this line has been drawn, assuming you don't click off of it, you can type in a value and hit the enter key and it's going to adjust, but I don't usually recommend that. What I usually recommend is when you want to draw something, move your mouse over the point that you want to draw from, single click, and then move your mouse in whatever direction you want, then type in a value. So in this case, 5 feet. Hit the enter key, that's going to draw a 5-foot line in this direction. Okay, so before we draw anything more complex, let's talk a little bit about navigation in the 3D space. Now, there's a couple different ways that you can do this. So the first is there are navigation tools over here in the toolbar on the left-hand side of the page. So for example, say I wanted to orbit around, I could come over here and I could single click on this orbit tool, move my mouse out here, and then I could left click and drag in order to orbit. That's a valid way of doing things, but it's not necessarily the way that I recommend. You could also do that with tools like the pan tool. So if I click in here and pan, I can click and drag in order to pan my view around. And you could also activate the zoom tool in order to zoom in and out. But there's a better, faster way that I usually recommend. And that way is if you have a 3-button mouse, which is basically a mouse with the left and right button and then a scroll wheel, you can use that scroll wheel to zoom in and out. So if I move my mouse over a point like this, so if I wanted to zoom in to this t-shirt right here, I could move my mouse over the point and I can scroll my mouse wheel up and down in order to zoom in and out like this. And notice how this is going to happen based on whatever point you have your mouse over. So this is zooming in and out based on that point on your screen, like this. So usually I use the scroll wheel in order to zoom. Well, what some people don't know is that scroll wheel is also a button, meaning you can click and hold that scroll wheel down in order to activate the orbit tool, like this. So I can click and hold the middle mouse button in order to orbit. I can also hold the shift key and click and drag the middle mouse button in order to pan. And so this is actually really powerful because I can use this in order to zoom in and out, rotate around, and pan just by holding that shift key and clicking and dragging, all without ever having to come over here and click on an icon. Now, one of the things that makes that really powerful is say that you wanted to draw a rectangle over here. So I'm going to tap the R key to draw a rectangle, and say that in the middle of drawing the rectangle, you wanted to view it from another direction. Well, right now, if I was to come over here and click on the orbit button, notice how it's going to deactivate that rectangle tool and just draw a rectangle in here, which is not necessarily what we want. On the other hand, and I'm going to tap the space key in order to move back out of here. If I activate the rectangle tool, single click, and then I click and hold the middle mouse button while that tool is active, notice how those tools, while you're using the middle mouse button in order to move around, stay active. So it's very preferable to navigate using the middle mouse button on your mouse when working in SketchUp. And so just real quick, it is easy in a 3D space sometimes to get kind of like turned around and lost and have trouble getting back to something that you actually recognize. There is a tool in here which I really like called Zoom Extents. So if you ever get like so far into your model that you like can't get out of it, just come over here and click on the Zoom Extents button. That'll zoom your camera out so that everything in your current model will be visible in one window. So that's a good way to kind of like reset your viewport. Okay, and so one of the things you might have noticed is when we drew this rectangle, it filled in the rectangle with a face. And so let's talk about how SketchUp creates faces. So if I was to come in here and I was to draw a line like this, I'm just going to single click, move my mouse and click again, and I'm going to draw another line this way. Right now, there's no face on this object. However, if I was to tap the L key, single click on this point, and then single click on this point, notice what SketchUp does is it fills in a face on this object. And so anytime you have 3 or more coplanar edges, SketchUp is going to fill in a face. And it doesn't matter how many edges it is, as long as they are all on the same plane and they're closed in, SketchUp will draw a face. So notice how this drew a face right here. Now, if you do not have 3 or more closed coplanar edges, this is not going to draw a face. So say that I was to draw a line up right here, and I'm just going to tap the E key and click and drag across this object. Notice how at the moment, even though I have a closed shape, there's no face in here. That's because these two objects are on a vertical plane. This one is on a horizontal plane. However, if I was to come in here and draw a line like this, notice how this is going to draw a face within those closed coplanar edges. So you do want to make sure that your edges are coplanar in order to get those faces to show up. Now let's talk just for a second about how to heal those faces and also how to get rid of the faces. So the first thing is if you activate the eraser tool, which is usually what we're going to do, you can also click on things and hit the delete button like this, but say that you were to tap the E key in order to activate the eraser tool, and we're just going to click and drag across this edge. Notice how this edge kind of highlights, and then when I let up on the mouse, it's going to erase that edge. Well, notice how that face goes away in here when you do that. And so the reason why is because these edges no longer form a closed shape. And so SketchUp removes the face. But if you were to come back in here and draw a line like this, notice how as soon as I draw that line in here, SketchUp redraws the face like this. So you can use this in order to heal faces. Now, one thing about this, and I'm just going to draw a circle. So I'm going to tap the C key, single click, and then click again to draw a circle. One thing about this is notice how if I delete out the face in here, there's really no edge to put back, right? I just took this face and hit the delete key to remove it. However, on a shape like this one, you could just redraw over one of the edges on the object and it's going to heal in that face automatically. So another way that you might do that is say that you had an object like this one, and I'm going to go ahead and just draw a line across here, delete out these two faces. And so you could also just draw a line over top of this face right here. Notice how both of those faces are going to fill back in. Okay, and so one thing that I want to make sure that you understand is the inferencing and the inference locking within SketchUp, because those get really powerful. And let me show you an example first. So say that I've got a rectangle like this one, and I had one edge in here. I'm just going to draw a line up like this. I'm going to draw a line across like this. So say that you were to try to draw a rectangle like this one, and you had one corner that was ever so slightly off. Right? Well, what's going to happen here is because this is ever so slightly off, it's not going to draw a face in. And the reason it's not going to draw a face in is because you don't have 3 or more coplanar edges. Now, if I was to draw a line across here like this, sure, you've got 1, 2, 3 coplanar edges, 1, 2, 3 coplanar edges. But if I erase this out, these are on a different plane, which means that you're never going to be able to get this to just fill in kind of a regular face, which can be really problematic. Now, there is a tool set in SketchUp that is really important that you need to understand that allows you to lock 2 different axes. You can also do inferences, which is valuable, but we're not going to get too much into that one. For now, what I want to do is I want to start by drawing a line. So I'm just going to come in here, activate the line tool by tapping the L key, and notice how if I single click and I move my mouse, I might get a line in this green direction. And so what I can do to lock to this green direction is I can hold the Shift key while this green direction is active. Notice what that's doing is that is locking this to that green inference, so in the direction that I moved my mouse. And I could do that on the blue direction by holding the Shift key. I could do that in the red direction by holding the Shift key. So that's one way to lock those. We want to use that inferencing as much as we can to draw things that are coplanar. However, there's an even better way to do this, which allows you to just lock this without holding the Shift key. So if I tap the left arrow key on my keyboard with this tool active right here, notice how this is locked in the green direction. So I can single click and then I can tap the right arrow key to lock it to this direction. Well, part of the value here is I can type in values when I do that. So if I tap the L key, click, move my mouse and tap the left arrow key and type in a value, so say I typed in a value of 4 feet, notice how this is allowing me to lock those inferences by tapping the arrow key like this. And so you can use that inferencing in order to lock things to those directions. Now, one other concept that I want to talk about in this video is the concept of extruding things, because up till now we've drawn 2-dimensional objects. Well, let's say that we were to draw a 3-dimensional object. So I'm going to tap the R key to activate the rectangle tool. I'm going to move my mouse like this, and notice how, by the way, I can tap the left, right, and up arrow keys in order to lock my rectangle to a direction as well. So I'm going to tap that up arrow key like this. Now I have a face in here. Well, you can take this object and say you wanted to draw it a 3D. Now you could come in here, whoops, and just draw in a couple lines really quick in order to get this to 3D, but that's really kind of time consuming, right? So I'm going to tap the E key and click and drag across this to erase it. What I can do instead is I can use a tool called the push-pull tool. What the push-pull tool is going to do, and you can either click on it or tap the P key on your keyboard, but it's going to allow you to mouse over a face like this and move your mouse in order to extrude a shape to 3D. So I can single click again in order to place this just like this. And you can do this with any flat shape. So not necessarily curved surfaces, which we'll talk about in a second, but if I tap the C key, single click, and move my mouse and then click again, I can draw a circle. Well, if I tap the P key, mouse over a surface, and move my mouse, notice what this is going to do is this is going to extrude this to 3 dimensions right here. And again, this is another place where single clicking is really valuable, because now that I've single clicked in order to activate this tool, I can mouse over whatever I want in order to set the height of the object like this. But you're going to use the push-pull tool a lot to extrude things to 3D. We'll talk about this more in the next video, but you can also use the push-pull tool in order to remove material. So if I tap the A key, for example, and mouse over this face right here, and I'm single clicking and I'm drawing an arc. So basically what I've done is I've split this face by drawing a line across it. Well, if I tap the P key, single click and move my mouse like this, notice how this is going to remove material. So you can use this to remove material off of an object. You can also use this in order to cut an opening. So if I tap the R key, notice how this is going to try to inference to whatever faces I put my mouse over, but I'm just going to single click, move my mouse up, and click again in order to draw a rectangle. Well, if I tap the P key, which is going to allow me to push-pull this shape, I could extrude it out in order to create a face, or I can move my mouse and I can align it with the back side of the object. Now, you could orbit around in order to find this back face, or you can also just find any point that's on the back side of this object right here. But notice how when I push-pull a face that aligns with a face like this rear one right here, what it's going to do is it's going to cut an opening as soon as I click. So if I was to push-pull this right here, and I want to make sure that I'm perfectly aligned with the back side of the face by clicking on this point, but notice how it removes this additional material in here as soon as you do this. So you can use the push-pull tool in order to remove material like this. And again, notice how if I move my mouse for a second, it's also going to show me an on face. When I click in the on face, it's going to cut that opening right here. All right, so that should be enough to get you started. In the next video, we're going to create a practical model using the knowledge that we built on in this video. So make sure you click on that subscribe button and stick around for that next video. I'll link to the full playlist on this page so that as I add videos to it, you can follow along. But as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.